Okay, well, it is 3 p.m. Good afternoon and welcome to everybody joining ThEUnitUK.com. Welcome to our Table Talk live show, where today we're going to be talking about energy and asking the question, what is all the nuclear, fracking, renewable, oil, gas, coal fusion about? Joining me today, we've got a number of guests, and I'll do some introductions to those in a moment. So we are going to be hopefully having joining us Trevor Colman, MEP. He's a little delayed at the moment, just trying to get through one or two technical problems. We have Sue Deutsch with us today, our administrator, and for those of you watching via the site, we would really like to get your comments and questions as we talk about the various aspects as we go through the show. And you can see just at the top of the page here, if you're watching live from our site, that we have a mobile telephone number there, which you can call or you can send text messages to. And we are monitoring and watching via Twitter, so you can ask questions there. And for our viewers on Google Plus and watching on YouTube, we also, of course, have the Q&A app active, and you can post questions in there as well that we can put to our panel of guests to ask questions about. Another member of our team here at the unit, Andrew Fear, is with us, and what Andrew's going to be doing today is looking for the articles and the supporting evidence for all of the legislation and all the documents that we have amongst the thousands of documents archived on our website, and he'll be posting those as links into the chat as we talk through, and basically providing the corroborative evidence for the things that we talk about that you can find on our website. And those links will all be available to you in the show notes at the end of the show today. So let me first of all introduce my two guests that are with me right now. So joining me on the show again, thank you very much for joining us, is Gadman Dubs. How are you today, sir?
Oh, good afternoon, Rick. I'm doing very well, thanks.
Fantastic. And joining me also today from Virginia, I hope I've got that right, Doug, is Doug Coulter. How are you, Doug?
Doing well, thank you, Rick. Yes, I'm in Virginia, USA.
Fantastic. Let me put a little bit of background to these two people for you, and do feel free to correct me if I've misunderstood it. One of the key things that I've got you down as billed for, of course, Doug, is that during the President Carter's administration, you were senior technology advisor to that administration. Have I got? Is that a reasonably good write-up for yourself at this time?
It's yeah. It's
Fantastic.
a little bit more complicated than that, but yeah, that's the soundbite.
That's good enough. And just to give a little bit of background to you, Gadman, of course, Gadman Dubs is a rapper and a music producer and works with a number of artists around the globe, helping produce music and develop records and so on and so forth. And I'm delighted that you could spend some time and join us here today. Okay, well, without further ado, let me start by opening up this with the first question and then putting it to the floor. And let's just think for a moment about energy production and generation overall. In the winter of 2013, here in Britain, the UK ran to within less than 24 hours of reserve energy. And what are your thoughts about the state of the UK energy resources as we stand at the moment? Let me put that one out to you first of all, Gadman.
Well, when you say what do I think about it, are you asking me if this is a bad situation or a good situation, or?
Well, I think what I'm saying is that I suppose I'm setting some context there. You can kind of take that in any direction you like. You can talk about the energy companies if you want, or do you think we've got the energy strategy right with a national grid? What do you think about the fact that, in the winter of 2013, very little reported in the mainstream media is the fact that we were, within one day of having to shut down industry so that we could maintain domestic supply of electricity and gas and things like that?
I believe that we're neglecting our nuclear capabilities. A lot of the plants are shutting down or not being used and maintained. Basically, and they've shut down the coal mines, and a lot of British energy we could have generated ourselves. But now we buy it in from abroad, costs too much. It's to do with the market rate. So we're always at the mercy of the market, and so the bills get very high, but the efficiency doesn't rise up, you know, to meet the cost of all this energy that we're buying in. So I think it's very bad that we could get down to such a low ability to be able to provide energy for ourselves in this day and age. We've got water, we've got wind, solar, natural gas. I'm not really that clued up about the fracking. I hear good and bad things about fracking. It seems like it could be a viable idea if there wasn't environmental negative.
It's both good and bad.
You know, so
Yeah.
that's about it for me, I think.
Okay. Now, I know obviously you're not in the UK, Doug, so you have a different energy strategy, and I know personally that you have a very different energy strategy. but just thinking about energy supply and you know, and our energy dependency, you know, what are your opening comments really about the way the US does things, for example, and how do you think and feel it perhaps ought to be done, Doug?
Well, we have similar issues to the UK from what you tell me. Since I don't live there, I'm not aware of everything going on there. But let me just say this, that it is scary that you got down to 1 day's worth. On the other hand, from in terms of what they're charging you, which everyone thinks is too much, it's expensive to maintain reserves that you never use. So in terms of what it's costing you, which is obviously a pass-through cost, whatever it costs the companies to have reserves and so on, if you say doubled your reserve so that you would never have a close call, it would cost you more every day even when you weren't using them, because they got to store them someplace and you got to pay for that storage. So they have a tiny business case to not store any more than they absolutely need. Yeah, I'm completely off the grid here except for internet, obviously, and I'm running on solar, but I've got probably most of the time more favorable weather than you do, being somewhat north of me.
Yeah.
So solar works a lot better here than it would probably in England. Although in the mountains here in Virginia, we have all 4 seasons in 1 day in spring, so often. It rained twice yesterday, and we had enough sun also yesterday to charge my electric car of my solar panels. So, but then there's also February where it's just dark all the time. And I actually burned 12 gallons of gasoline last year to back up my solar system. Yeah,
well, let me add,
you have a lot of options. It's just, you know, a question of making a good plan, I think.
Yeah. So, well, in fact, that's a good point to focus on now, is making a good plan, because we've got a little bit of conjecture or contention here, because we reported earlier this week on Monday or Tuesday, one of the leading stories on our website was the fact that the EU had just introduced another 2 countries, I think it was Portugal and Spain, into effectively this buying group, this energy buying group that buys its next day pricing mechanism that allows the buyers to act in a monopolistic fashion and buy capacity on the grid, etc. What's interesting about that is that the story reports that the EU effectively is pushing towards this kind of collaborative group monopoly of energy buying, if you like. Here in the UK, we're dominated by 6 energy corporations, which is the big 6 that David Cameron is talking about. And David Cameron, on the one hand, is talking about introducing more competition into the marketplace to reduce prices. Of course, the European Union story that we reported earlier this week is introducing less competition. So, you know, it's interesting to know where those pricing strategies are going to go from. Now, Andrew will drill up those stories as we look about that. But what I want to just move to for a moment is, of course, about independent energy generation. Now, earlier this year, we reported about the Hinkley C nuclear reactor, just thinking about nuclear. Now, in essence, this is it's going to be erected with a build cost of 16 billion. It'll generate £77 billion in revenue for its Franco-Chinese investors, and it's going to be selling energy to the grid for 20 years at double cost price today. So let's start with you, Gadman. What do you think about that as a strategic investment for our energy problem?
That sounds like a total scam. That sounds like a scam. Like, I mean, scam is not the word, but it's kind of like an insult in a way to just basically not make our own efforts to generate our own energy. You know, I mean, there's enough intellects in this country with the will to come together and utilise all the utilities we've got. You know, natural resources here, and we could support ourselves. I mean, I know Doug would probably deny what I'm going to say now, but there is suggestion of over-unity machines being, you know, very close to being domesticated, you know, and people like the British Constitutional Group, they're talking about issuing these to their members. So there must be something in it if they could talk like this.
Yeah.
I'm looking.
Well, we are going to be. We're going to come back to that point towards the end when we start talking about, you know, the latest modern technologies and also, of course, potential future technologies. So I won't start a conversation there about over unity and 0 point. But what I will say, let me just add to this comment about the Hinkley C reactor before I pass it over to Doug for comment. And of course, there's controversy with the Hinkley C reactor because, of course, it's French and Chinese investors. UK government cannot use British taxpayers' money to build that reactor because of European Union illegal state aid. But even though that's taking place, the EU Commission is still getting involved because it's saying that the overall build cost and implementation is too expensive, and so they're trying to veto this being built in UK. So there's an awful lot of shenanigans going around it. But Doug, what's your feelings on, you know, on a nuclear reactor, and what do you think about that economic strategy for deploying it?
Well, I don't know enough about the economic strategy other than, yes, they're very expensive to build, and it's a shame that you guys couldn't use your own money because you'd have gotten a better deal, most likely. As you might know, I'm not a big fan of fission power, just because mankind doesn't seem to be responsible enough to deal with the mess it can make. But there's no scientific objection to it at all. You know, it works, and it's inexpensive once you've built the plant. Most of the expense of building a plant is conforming to certain regulations, not all of which makes sense in terms of safety and efficiency. And it's a shame that, you know, you wind up with foreign investors doing this who are going to collect most of the money. And then I'm not sure how a deal was made that they're going to sell it at double cost. That sounds a little, like you say, shenanigans. It just doesn't sound right, although I will say expensive energy is better than no energy.
Yeah, indeed.
We had a tough winter here too, and I luckily didn't get down to within a day of heating, but I got, you know, I burned a lot more fuel than I would want to.
Yeah. Let me just try and welcome Trevor, because it looks like we've got a camera feed from him. Let's see whether he's here and it's all working. Hiya, Trevor. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, fantastic. Brilliant stuff.
I'm sorry I'm late, but it's just trying to get this aging body around this new technology. Eventually someone across the way, so here we are.
Fantastic. Well, I'm delighted that you're here and that you were able to solve those problems. We were just talking about something that you might have some input in. I'll just reiterate it very briefly. We reported on the website last year and early this year about the development to build this new reactor, new nuclear reactor at Hinkley C. And of course, this is being built with French and Chinese investment money because UK government can't use UK taxpayers' money because of EU state aid legislations and regulations. Of course, it's built at £16 billion. It'll generate £77 billion over its 20-year lifespan, and it's going to sell its energy at double today's current cost. You know, what are your thoughts and feelings about that project, Trevor, and about nuclear in general, and so on?
Well, in relation to the project itself, this is just another example of how supine the population in this country are. We're being robbed by our own politicians here, not just in order to comply with the EU regulations, but in order to make sure that there's nothing that can be used as a power for us to use, not just to turn the electric light on, but to combat and argue with the politicians. These are important facets of our life, these pieces of energy, and this is another way of exercising control over a fast disappearing nation. And this is happening, the public are seeing it and doing nothing at all about it. It's a disgrace, really.
Yeah, I think it's a story that's been batting backwards and forwards on our site as various aspects have got involved, and of course once the position was put forward with the investment, then the EU has got in again involved with the pricing of this and the price of the energy being sold to the grid and so on and so forth. And of course all of this is delaying the project and slowing it down. Now, of course, we know about the issues, the concerning issues around it. But of course, when you run to less than 24 hours of energy, it's clear that we do need these kinds of energy production things. But I want to move forward into the slightly more hairy topic of renewables. Here in the UK, we seem to have focused our efforts on two aspects of that: wind farm generation and solar PV, solar panels that we've put in place. Now, of course, there's been a lot of offshore wind farms and onshore wind farms and so on and so forth. Let me start with Gadman again and ask him, what are your thoughts about the wind farm technologies as a renewable in general, Gadman?
I'm not sure about these subsidies getting paid to these fat cat landowners for a start. That's a bad look, I think. Plus, I'm sure they could make miniature versions you could put on tops of houses, and that could generate some power, I suppose, to the house. I mean, I don't know what Doug thinks that's a good idea, but I'm thinking about, instead of them being, this smaller, and putting them on like an aerial on the top of your house. Must be able to help. I mean,
yeah,
that could be spread out across England.
Now that's an interesting question, because we've taken this big scale engineering philosophy when it's come to wind power, and our strategy is to build these enormous turbines and then try to feed huge amounts of volume onto the grid and then distribute it. But what you're saying there is why not just simply skip the grid and generate the power locally using smaller turbines where we can locally use that power? Doug, what are your thoughts on the two sides of the technology?
Well, it's, again, I fear I would give you too many details. The big turbines are very attractive because they're incredibly more efficient than small ones, and they will work in much lower wind than a small one will. Unfortunately, no one wants to live right next to a big one because they're noisy and things fall out of the sky after hitting the turbine blades and whatnot. There is loss and expense in moving from where you'd want to put the big turbines to where the people want to consume the power. So it's it's one of those questions where there's no right answer.
Okay.
Or no single right answer. I'd use wind here, but I don't like it because where I am, wind turbine becomes a fantastic lightning attractor. And something you might not think about is with these big turbines, the roller bearings that that run the main rotor you couldn't even put one in a truck, okay, or a lorry. They're so huge, and a lightning strike on one of those doesn't hurt them. But on these kilowatt, 2 or 3 kilowatt home style generators, a single lightning bolt destroys it.
Yeah, but why can't you just cover them in rubber or make them out of carbon or some non-attractive material that would attract?
Unfortunately, you sort of can't. A voltage that will jump, half a mile from a cloud will not be stopped by a number of inches of rubber you can apply. It just jumps right through it.
I mean, the blades don't have to be made of metal at all, do they?
No, they don't, but the tower generally is.
Yeah, but you'll make it out of something else, couldn't you?
Could.
That's what I'm saying. There's ways around. Think about it.
Yeah.
There are ways around. They all increase the cost, and that's it's all about cheap energy, and it's something I have often complained about. I do a lot of computer microprocessor design, stuff like that. Every part that I get, be it a microprocessor or a chip or a big video card or something like this, has probably been in 6 to 8 countries before it got into my hands. They fab them in Silicon Valley. They send them to Taiwan, Mexico to be put in the chip itself and bonded. Send them to Taiwan to be built, maybe some other country to be tested, and then they ship it to me. So we've developed a whole economy worldwide based on cheap shipping. And if the price of energy goes up, it's not just the price of energy going up, would be my point. It's a whole lot of other things.
So, well, I mean, certainly, so it seems there are pros and cons on either side of this. It's not quite so clear about that locally produced energy, although it most certainly is possible. Of course, in the news,
it can be bad to ask an honest scientist about things like this because we try to see all sides of it.
Well, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's the case at all. What we are trying to do here is trying to drill down to the facts and find out what the facts are so that people watching can be informed, because the problem you have with politicization is that you don't get the facts and then you can't make an informed decision, and that's the problem. But of course, we have been reporting, and there's stories on our websites about the set aside of agricultural land, the fact that you've got farmers now who can generate significant revenues, probably better revenues from having a field with 2 or 3 wind turbines in it than they can from generating crops, which is fine because you're producing energy, but somewhere along the line we've got to grow some things to start feeding some people. But I'm just going to move across to Trevor now and ask him for his thoughts. And I will come back to you in a moment, Doug. I will come back to you in a moment on this topic. But in general, Trevor, what are your thoughts on the strategy with regards to wind turbines, just as a viable mechanism of producing energy?
Well, it is a problem. That's the problem. We get confusing data from various sources, but the general view is that it's not particularly productive. There are only certain wind speeds that it will function at. If it's below or above that wind speed, the turbine won't function. So, first of all, it is questionable. Secondly, there are other considerations. I went back down to the Vision Cornwall that I was born and bred in again, and I tell you now that the 2 biggest hills on Bodmin Moor, which is where I was born, are known as Router, the hill of Router, and another hill called Brown Willie. Now, these are massive hills that reach up into the sky, and lots of moorland on either side of both of them. A magnificent barren moorland. There was a move to 3 massive wind turbines, which, because of their situation, would you believe, would have towered over these hills. Thankfully, because there was a large movement against this, they've been abandoned. But it does raise the question of environment and people's view on what they want to live amongst, and I think that's as important as power. I'm not at all sure that we can come together on this and take all these things into consideration and find some less intrusive source of power, for example, wave power, and solar panels aren't really intrusive at all. You can drive past them and not notice that they're on a roof, even on an old cottage. So there are other less intrusive forms and more efficient forms than wind turbines. And I'd like to see, this is a personal view, I'd like to see wind turbines discontinued.
Thank you for that, Trevor. So now, for our viewers watching at the moment, obviously we're right into the topic, the essential topic now about renewable energy, and this is a controversial topic for many people across the UK. There are lots of options on the table with onshore wind farm, offshore wind farm, wave power that Trevor just talked about, solar PV, and of course hydroelectric. But what we'd like to know is, what are your thoughts? what are your thoughts and comments about Renewable? Now, you can interact with us live on this show right now. If you're watching live from the website, you can see that there is a mobile SMS telephone number. If you're outside of the UK, just prefix that with 0044, and you can send a text message to Sue, who will post your question to us for the panel to ask, and also post your comments. Or, of course, you can interact with us via Twitter. Simply just put @ThEUnit in your post and then put your comment or your question, and Sue will pick up on that for us and post it in for the panel here to discuss. So just following forward on this, let me just welcome Peter Brown, who's just joined us. Hello, Peter. Thank you. You've obviously got the technical difficulties solved.
Yes, I have. Thanks, Rick, and good morning to you. Or good afternoon to you, but all of you.
Good morning.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. Basically we're in the middle of talking about renewables right now. What I want to talk about for a moment, because we're really blessed today, because we've got somebody who's got absolutely first-hand experience of how solar PV can work and how effective it can be using it in an independent site. So, Doug, can you just tell us and our audience a little bit about how you operate your facility there off-grid and what your energy provision is?
Well, when you're doing it the way I'm doing it, I'm really off-grid. I'm not trying to use the power company for my batteries, so to speak. You do accept a bit of inconvenience. Sometimes when you want to run the air conditioning the most is when it's dark just before a rainstorm. And you learn to have hot backups that you test on top of your backups, because when things fail, they always fail at Saturday night, and all the stores are closed until Monday. Other than that, it's been a fantastic. It's more like freedom is the reason I'm doing it. I'm not really a big tree hugger, although I live in a nature preserve that I created. It's more like freedom to not have to pay a bill, to not have to work for someone to pay that bill, and to be able to do my other fusion research and other stuff as a result. I find it works very well for me. I'm powering a 4-home campus off of solar panels. But you have a job. When you become the power company for yourself, you have a job. You're the power company. When something fails, you fix it now, even if it's in the middle of the night or whatever.
And how many kilowatts does how many kilowatts do you generate with the panels that you've got? What's the capacity of your panels?
Well, it's obviously 0 at night, and that's the real issue. Battery technology, I would kill to have the battery technology that's in my Chevy Volt, or I guess over where you live it would be called an Opel Ampera, because it's so far superior to what we mostly are using here. I'm using submarine batteries from, submarines.
Okay.
The trouble is they have a fixed lifetime or a variable lifetime depending on how hard you beat on them. Just to give you an example, a typical very high quality lead acid battery will withstand about 1,000 full charge cycles, which if you do it every day, that's what, 3 years. On the other hand, it'll withstand 10,000 1/10 cycles. So if you want it to live a long time, and I do, I don't want to ever have to buy batteries again as long as I live, you have to buy more batteries up front. And that gets into time value of money issues and stuff like that when you talk about how it affects an economy. Yeah. But that's what I did because I wanted the freedom, and the power is wonderful. And I'm even, like I said, driving an electric car on this. I get about 8 kilowatts peak, but anytime you can go outside and see where you're going without a flashlight, I'm getting something.
Okay. So we're here in the UK. We've had
4 hours a day, and then some days it's 12 or 15 hours, and some days it's no hours, on full power.
And that, well, of course, that's one of the problems with solar is that you are dependent on the weather. Here in the UK, we're still pretty much, our strategy seems to be big energy and supply onto the grid. So we've got lots of panels that have been put on the roofs of homes and then all hooked into the grid, and we've had various government incentives that have changed and been moved around for that. Of course, we've had across here in the southwest, we've had areas of fields, acres of fields that have been filled with solar panels. But in the interest of just keeping things moving along for a moment, let me just throw that over to Gadman. And obviously you've got more experience of seeing what we've been doing with solar PV. Have you seen much of this deployed where you are here in the UK, Gadman?
Yeah, I see quite a bit of it. It seems very common. Like, a lot of people do have solar panels on their roofs now, and it seems I've been looking at some videos of people using very efficient battery storage. It's all about, there is very efficient battery storage systems out there. You just got to look for them, and there's even more efficient panels as well. So it's all to do with innovating yourself in that way, and using your intelligence to try and improve your situation, because solar panels are viable. I believe they are viable.
I'm living proof. I've been living off them since 1979.
Yeah. I'm all for it.
Well, let's get some commentary from Peter Brown for a moment then, who's just joined us. Peter, what are your feelings on solar PV? Where you are in the UK, is there much of it going on there?
There's a bit. You see several private houses with it, but I don't think I've seen anything in a large scale in the immediate area. Quite honestly, I believe it's a joke to completely cover up an arable field with panels that prevent you growing anything. This country that relies on mostly imported food, as it is now. We should be getting back to producing our own food instead of these, to my mind, useless panels.
Right.
Doug's
actually, I have to agree. I agree with you. It's silly to cover up farmland with solar panels. I didn't do it myself.
No.
I get enough off my roof.
Yeah, Doug, have you ever considered a Bellini motor driving a permanent magnet alternator?
We're going to come back to that in a moment, Peter. We're going to talk about it in a moment. I'm going to talk about those kind of new future energies, because we've got some interesting stuff to talk about there. I just want to stay on the topic of solar PV, and interestingly, let's get a viewpoint from Trevor as well and see what he's seen, and also in particular, what does he think about arable land? Trevor,
can I just make one small note before you go? Our local health centre installed at a cost of £6,000, several panels on the roof there. In 8 years, they've only alleviated 29 tonnes of pollution, which to me is a joke. The UK is not suited to solar panels.
Yeah.
I guess my camera's blooming out on this. This is the control panel for my solar system right now. It's showing me almost already charged all the way up this morning at 10:30.
It's 10:30 a.m. at the moment in where you are.
Yeah, and I'm already charged up fully, or nearly fully. Let's see, about 90%.
Can you switch it off, Doug?
Switch what off?
The power when you're fully charged.
Yeah, this is all handled by. I could at some point move my camera and show you some of the rest of my system, but it's all controlled by a bunch of computer-controlled charge controllers and whatnot.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I have several different AC circuits that are run off separate inverters off the big battery bank that can be selectively turned on and off depending on what I need and where I need it.
So that helps you control your cycling as well, then.
Let me try and interject here, and because we will get drawn into too much detail, and we are tight for time. I've got to be very careful with the time frame, because obviously we've only got an hour to do this. Yeah. So. Yeah, just over to you for a moment, Trevor. I mean, have you, where you are in the UK, have you seen much in the way of solar PV? And have you seen these fields with solar PV arrays in them that I've seen where I am?
Yes, so I traveling to London on the train. We passed through arable land, agricultural land, and you are right, they're spreading like wildfire. Again, over the weekend down in Cornwall, and for Doug's sake, Cornwall and Devon are holiday areas, and no beauty. To see these fields cover this stuff, I agree with you. It might be highly efficient. That's questionable, but they do spoil the land. I just wanted to add something that is to do with the recent elections we had to the European Parliament and the fact that there was this upsurge in the vote, which was, if you like, anti-EU. And we were told by the politicians, well, this is a protest vote and so on and so forth. They're obviously going to ignore what the people voted for. And the same thing applies to these kind of things. When people object to wind turbines being put up, there's usually some form of hearing and some form of consultation. But at the end of the day, people now resign to the fact that 9 times out of 10, it's just going to go through anyway. And that applies not just to this kind of product, but it applies to house building, it applies to closing post offices, it applies to closing services. All these things are done, and there's some supposedly listening process which is totally ignored, and the same thing applies to this business of power. People want power, but they don't want to live amongst a load of spinning, most times stationary wind turbines. I'm sorry to sound off about it, but that's the country we live in at the moment.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, we've seen a lot of, we've seen interference almost stalling the Hinckley process, which is what we talked about earlier on. And, irrespective of the local population's disagreement with things like wind turbines or coal, or solar PV, they still go ahead. I noticed today on Twitter, and it's probably reported on our website, but an old Welsh coal mine has now been filled up with wind turbines in Wales, and there's been a lot of controversy over that. And you're absolutely right. Nobody in the political system seems to be listening at all. And let's just keep things shifting along for a moment, because in the Queen's speech earlier this week, she has announced now that the government is going to make amendments to UK trespass law, and the government is going to legislate to go ahead full steam with the development of fracking. And the changes to the trespass law mean that under the new laws, so long as you go below a certain depth, you can go and frack underneath people's houses and drill into the ground all over the place. There's a huge drive by the corporates to get this fracking movement underway in the UK. So let me throw that one at you for a moment, Gadman. What are your thoughts about fracking in general, and also what are your thoughts about the fact that there's this disconnect between what the people seem to be saying and what the government and the EU and everything else want to do? Let's get into this topic.
Fracking hell.
Yeah, really.
To that one, but yeah, definitely this fracking situation. It seems it's getting worse now. This is obviously another treasonous act they're trying to mess around with. Well, the acts are treasonous anyway, I believe.
It's not going to fly long.
This trespass law, that is a blatant disrespect to the people, and to be able to dig under their homes and put them potentially in danger, things like this is outrageous. That's what I could say. My mind's blown. Basically, what you just said there. This is almost like we're in a communism, It's like to do whatever they want. The state does whatever it wants, and the
it's
people
called fascism.
Away, basically.
Yeah, it is.
Just to interject for a second here, this is what is cooling over half of my solar system. This is the electronics part. I'd have to go outside to show you the batteries and whatnot, or the panels.
Okay.
Oh, well.
Okay.
Now, you've got a lot of fracking going on in the States. There's been a lot of controversy for a long time, but they've done a lot of it in the States, Doug.
Yes.
What are the people on the ground saying? Have you got similar levels of protest and disaffectedness?
Yes, but it depends on who you ask. Again, I tie into this from my trading activities, financial trading activities and other things. The people who are right next to it don't like it. And unfortunately, some of their complaints are bogus and some of them are real, and it's a big job sorting out what's what. The real problem with fracking is that natural gas in the United States is already so cheap that it's just not a very good deal financially unless you can also get some oil-type liquids out of it, which they do. But in order to just maintain the same output over time that we had, let's say last year, we've had to double the wells because you hit peak gas the instant you open the well. Okay, I don't know if you're familiar with peak oil, but
Yeah.
you just have to keep drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling, and you're running in place to just stay in the same place. And that's really the main problem with fracking, is that the fact that we're having to even think about doing it tells us what our real problem is that the easy oil's already been had. And fracking is much more expensive per energy produced. We call it energy returned on energy invested. So as a trader, I don't get involved in fracking. Now, the guys who are doing it, we have 2 states full of frackers, and the guys who are doing it are the only people in America who are highly employed at extremely high paychecks to go and do this stuff. And so they're a big part of our economic, whatever little bit of goodness that we have coming down the pike is the guys who are hired to do fracking. They're getting 6-7-figure paychecks to do it.
Now, in terms of the technology behind fracking, the ability to do fracking, how long has that technology been around, Doug? How long have we been able to do this process?
We've been able to do it for a long time, but we only got good at it recently.
Okay.
Is the best way to say that.
Because I want to throw in this back just to the UK perspective. I'm going to come back to Gadman for a moment, but and see whether you agree with me or what you think about this. But, when oil was $20 a barrel, I don't think that UK, when oil was $20 a barrel and we were pumping it out of the North Sea like there was no tomorrow, I don't think we would have ever considered this idea of fracking. But now oil is $100 a barrel, okay, and the North Sea wells are dry. Our government, irrespective of the public's opinion, seems to want to go ahead now and just drill holes all over the place. Gadman, what do you think?
Seems like a corporate takeover. That's what it seems like. Their whole approach is from a corporate aspect. It's nothing to do with the people's will or anything to do with the welfare of the UK. It seems like whoever does it don't care at all. They'll just dig up everywhere and just extract everything out of England, regardless of the consequences. I mean, it could be safe, but then it could not be. I'm not sure if it's been tested enough to ensure that ain't going to destroy our land. That it's not going to really contaminate our beautiful England.
Well, I mean, in the southeast of the UK, this is a big issue. I'm going to throw this out to Trevor in a moment. I'll just make this comment. But in the southeast, much of the water that's drawn is drawn from the water table below ground. And of course, the concern with fracking is that you can contaminate that water table. But Trevor, I understand that in much of Europe, much of the rest of the member states are actually against fracking. What's your take on what's going on here with the Queen's speech and this new legislation and fracking in general?
Well, as far as the Queen's speech is concerned, it was pathetic that one of the things that she mentioned was plastic shopping bags. Now that about sums up our Parliament. This is the big issue in the Queen's speech, how pathetic it is. Talking about the whole question of power, I believe that I believe in the market, in the open market, but I also believe that there are some things that are like national essentials, and that includes electricity, gas, water, power, whatever, which you can put to one side and say, look, those are outside the market. These are things that people need to live, and I think that until we adopt this attitude, so that the people have got some kind of say in what's going on, we're never going to solve it. There is a lack of real information on what's good and what's not good, and what's efficient and what's not efficient. We haven't had a really good dialogue about that. Thinking about having just said that, we haven't had a good dialogue about anything. So this reflects also in the way we're looking at power in this country. I'd like to see, as I say, this national essentials defined, and then we deal with it as a nation. and so everybody would be able to have their 10 pence worth in there. I think it would work. It certainly works in Switzerland, and I think some form of that kind of governmental process could be applicable to our country as well, particularly on this topic.
Yeah. I'm just looking here at what Andrew's putting in there, posting into the room, and we've got lots of stories on our website. So for people on our website, of course, we'd like to really get your comments on fracking. What do you think about it? Is it happening local to you? I know there's big issues around the development in Barton Moss, and there's been huge amounts of furore and controversy around that. You can comment via Twitter at ThEUnit, put that in your post, and of course use the telephone number above, or you can comment via our YouTube Q&A app. One of the things that is interesting is that it says here, Andrew's posted a story you can find on our website that says Britain thwarts the EU's plan to create binding fracking rules. And of course, the investment in fracking in the UK is being driven by Total, the French company, who have been categorically banned from doing any fracking in France. Peter, what are your comments and thoughts on fracking in general? What do you think?
Well, for one thing, it has been around for a very, very long time. When South Africa was subject to trade embargo, they got a lot of their oil from shale, which is pretty much the same sort of thing, I believe.
They were using a Fischer-Tropsch process to change coal into petrol.
Yeah,
which is not the same thing as fracking. Actually, it's mining and then processing.
I stand corrected on that. But the trouble is, our need for oil is down considerably to deliberate wastage. Modern cars are designed to waste petrol, and it's illegal to change it. Both in America and this country.
Wait a minute. They just came out with mandates that cars get better gas mileage in America, and my hybrid out there is right now showing 220 plus miles to the gallon of gasoline.
That may be the case, Doug, but with fuel-injected engines, they've got a computer control. The computer is set at a very high or very low fuel-air ratio, 14.7. They tried to convince us it's stoichiometric ratio, but in fact a car will run adequately on 20-to-1 ratio.
Or at least 16.
If you alter it at all, the engine computer automatically dumps more fuel into the system to waste it and just blows out an over-rich mixture.
Yeah, cars have become non-modifiable by normal people, although plenty of people make custom ROM chips to control this.
Let me finish what I'm saying, Doug. Fords are known to be sitting on patents from other people. They bought them and then dark hold them. In particular, there's a number of cases where they've developed a carburetor that will run an American large block V8 engine at 200 miles to the gallon. And bearing in mind that an American gallon, a British imperial gallon is 1.2 American gallons, so it's considerably higher than that, and yet they're dark holing it because
I think
they don't want to do that.
And it's clear that you're very enthusiastic about that topic there, Peter, but we're drawing ourselves way off topic. Let me just pull this back in, just in the interest of keeping time. I'm going to move on from this question of fracking because we've got some other areas that I want to talk about, but there is lots more news on our site, and for those people watching the recording, there are loads of stories in the show notes, so you can look at that. Of course, one of the other things, just thinking about this, we're looking here at this disparity, if you like, between the implementation of renewables. We know that renewables can be utilized effectively because Doug is a prime example of that, and we know that they're being deployed. Germany, here in Europe, has been a leader in using renewable technology. But very interestingly, just this week, we were reporting that, unfortunately, that renewable technology has not been successful because, on large scales, it's so dependent on the weather. So we now have a situation where EU money and investment into Germany to build huge solar plants and wind turbines and huge amounts of investment, all of that energy capacity has had to be backed up with fossil fuels and coal burning. We reported this week that, of course, Germany is now Europe's biggest polluter for the current guise. So controversial stuff. Gadman, what do you think about that?
I think they should pay more tax then into the system, to compensate. give some of the money back, you know. All those, yeah, well, it's surprising, really. I thought they was super efficient, the Germans, with their, you know, cleansiness. But it seems like they're actually ahead of us now. So I don't know what else to say about that. I mean, how bad is it?
Well, I think they were saying that it was an increase in carbon emissions of about 2.3%, whereas some of the other countries that had been trying to make reductions had got reductions, but Germany had gone up by about 2.3%. I'm just looking here to see whether Andrew's dug the story out yet, but he'll get it in a moment, and it'll be in the show notes. And all the details for all of the percentages across the member state blocks is shown there. So, but you know, it's a controversial topic, and again, you know, I think where we ought to be coming from this, you know, is that it doesn't seem to be as successful as we might like it to be on a large scale. But we know that independent implementations can and do work, because Doug has got that working very successfully. Where we come back to, of course, with this is the point that Trevor is making, which is that our hands have been firmly cable tied behind our backs about how we make our energy policy and what decisions we can do. We can't even build a nuclear station without interference from the outside. That's an important point that I think people need to get across. But I want to move forward now, because we're very, very short for time, but I really want to get this session in. So I'm going to start with this question, which is that success with the development of fusion power and fusion energy in the UK has been attained on an experimental level with the JET reactor, which is the Joint European Torus reactor, which is in Cambridge, Oxfordshire. Is in Oxfordshire. But now that project has shown itself to be successful, it's now going to be superseded by the ITER project, which should come on stream in 2026 in France at a cost of 50 billion euros. So the question is this: the UK had been leading this project. The project is shifting across to France. Before we start, though, let's just get some background on what fusion is and its tangibility as a power source from a person who's been working with it. Doug, can you give us a brief summary what fusion is and what are the possible routes to attaining it?
Well, there's a lot of routes, and that's actually been the problem, is that we put all our money on one basket, which may or may not be the best one, but it is certainly the one that encourages the centralization of power plants to the benefit of the corporations. Fusion is essentially pushing light elements together to get heavier elements and recovering the nuclear binding energy. The light elements don't have very much between the protons and the neutrons, and the somewhat heavier elements like helium or other ones have much more binding. They're much more tightly bound, and what we're getting, the way we're getting our energy is from essentially better packing of the nucleons together. JET has probably produced more net sheer pounds of fusion, whatever you want to call that, than any other fusion reactor on the world. And the Brits and the other people who are working there. Just because it's in Britain doesn't mean it's all British, okay?
Indeed.
Not hardly. 340 consortiums are working there, as far last I heard. I studied up last night. And they're inventing it, and who cares if they build it in France? They're still building it with Germans and English and everybody else. I think that's the wrong approach, personally. That's why I'm taking another approach. It turns out that the tokamak, big, contained plasma with a magnetic field thing, is only suited to very large installations because of the plain old law that goes way back that says the surface area to volume ratio of something decreases the bigger you make it, and all the losses are at the surface. And so in trying to get a efficient fusion reactor by the tokamak method, you have to make them really, really, really big, so they have a lot of volume but not much surface area in relation.
Which is what they're doing with ITER in France. The ITER implementation will be much, much bigger than JET. And I do take your point about the fact that there are obviously scientists from around the globe working and developing
Yeah, there's
on
even
this.
Americans there. I know some of them. So the problem with trying to contain charged particles with magnetic fields is that it's like trying to put three-axis gyroscopes in something so that you can't easily tilt it in any direction, but then expecting it to float in midair. Magnetic fields can only turn charged particles. They can't stop them. And so the whole tokamak effort is this effort to get rid of the various instabilities that you get when you keep trying to turn stuff so much that it stays in a container. And most of their losses are losses of plasma through the field into the tank walls, and that causes other issues.
So tying the question back then, in your estimation, obviously you've been looking at this for a while. You know, we don't currently have any commercially viable fusion reaction. If I was to ask you to put a number on the time frame for a commercially viable, production unit of fusion, what would you take a stab at, Doug?
Oh gosh, if it's by the tokamak method, I'd give you 20 years. Other methods may get us there quicker, but no governments are funding them, so there's guys like me out here self-funding.
Yeah. Okay. Let's. I know Peter's very interested in this particular topic, so let's get some comment from you as well, Peter, on fusion and what your overall review of it is. What do you think?
Well, if it can be achieved, that will solve all our problems. Nuclear reaction is not liked by the general population, largely out of ignorance, but fusion should take care of those prejudices. It would be a lot safer, obviously, than nuclear power. We need to go that way if we can achieve it, but it's a holy grail. It's been chased for many, many years, and we haven't actually got anything viable yet, apart from a few.
I'd like to point out a real dangerous discrepancy, too. All of these guys are pointing out what their yield would be if they used deuterium-tritium fuel, which makes neutrons that are so energetic they take your superconducting magnets to pieces in minutes. That's why ITER stopped for quite some time in their development, because, believe it or not, 10 or 15 years into it, and they've been at this for a long time, they realized this. You would think lots of PhDs would have figured that out a long time ago, but 16 megavolt neutrons take stainless steel into dust. And they're reporting about 100 times their actual output due to the assumption that they, in real life, they will use this much more energetic neutron-producing fuel. Whereas what I report is what I actually get with deuterium only. Just FYI.
So, well, of course, you know, there are so many possibilities and options on the table. Unfortunately, right now we're coming down to the last few minutes. I wanted to bring in the idea about 0 point and free energy and the test and the legacies. You know, those guys that spend time on the internet, you guys will know that this is the YouTube abounds with all of these machines, the permanent magnet stuff, and so on and so forth. Let's start with you, Peter, because I know that you've been looking at this. Then I'm going to come to Gadman, and then I'm going to ask Doug for his opinions. Try to be quite succinct, because I want to finish on the dot, and I want to go around and get an objective summary from everybody. Peter, over unity, that was the thing that the question. Over unity, permamagnets, free energy. What do you think?
Well, first of all, it's a misnomer. There's no such thing as over unity. You can't get any extra power unless you put it in, or it's put in from somewhere else. There is such a point that they talk about 0 point energy as well. If you drop the temperature of the conducting material down and see what power you got left over after that. But Tesla, back in the 1920s, was a great authority on this kind of power. He proved it can happen, but he died a pauper, unfortunately, and it never really caught on. It should do. I mean, there's a number of people working on it these days, John Bellini in particular. Patrick J. Kelly, I mentioned in the side there to Doug, he has been doing this for a number of years, and I strongly suggest that people look up Patrick J. Kelly on Google and read his documents. They are extremely interesting. We haven't got time to go into it now. I'm looking now at the clock. We've got a couple of minutes to go. So I'll sign off on that particular aspect, but I would strongly advise people to look at those documents. There are so many alternatives that could be used with the right, and just development is required, that's all.
Wow. Okay. So let me. I really want to. We've just been hit with a question from Pete Phillips. It's a question that is actually being directed to Doug. So let's see what Doug says. Doug, the question is this: what about thorium reactors?
Thorium reactors are breeder reactors. Thorium itself is not fissionable. You have to breed it first into uranium-232, which is then fissionable. I think it's dangerous. Every breeder reactor ever built has either melted down or been shut down because it almost melted down. You have to run them much closer to prompt critical and much closer to bomb conditions to get economically feasible stuff. So I have a lot of doubt about it. A lot has been sold to investors on thorium. It would be nice to find a use for this otherwise waste material from rare earth mining. But I think we're a long way away from having something safe. India, I think, is saying 10 years, and they're the world leader in it right now because they've got a lot of thorium.
Yeah.
And they want to export rare earths, which they all come together in the ore.
Unfortunately, it's such a shame because we're this top. I think we could do another hour on this topic, but right now we are unfortunately out of time. So we can't do any more on this topic right now. But why not get in touch with us via Twitter, send your questions in. If you'd like us to talk more and debate more in this show about energy, perhaps you'd like us to speak more specifically about new technologies, fusion or renewables, or debate fracking, or talk about those things. If you've got topics or questions that you think we should ask, then get in touch with us. You can do that via the contact section on our website. You can find contact details for myself, Andrew, and Sue there. Of course, you can contact us via Twitter or follow us on Google+. We'd invite you to come along and join our ThEUnit community. And of course, we will be back in a fortnight's time with another table talk show at the same time of 3 p.m. It just remains for me to give a warm, hearty thank you to Gadman Dubs, Doug Coulter, Peter Brown, and Trevor Colman. Thank you all for being our guests with myself, Rick Timmis, and Andrew and Sue here at ThEUnit. So until the next time, have a great day, and we'll see you soon.